The next thing to do on the chandelier was to start wiring it up. I wanted all the wires to be evenly spaced across the chandelier, but again, I was nervous about how well I would keep the drill bit straight up and down as I drilled through the 8 inches of beam. So I thought it best to flip the chandelier over and drill it from its underside. I didn't think it would be very noticeable if the wires were a little out of alignment on the top. I didn't want the lights to run right down the center of the beam. I thought they would look a little bit better if they were off-center. I alternated sides back and forth, but still kept them evenly spaced apart from each other. Then I used a long 1/4 inch drill bit to get through the 8 inches of beam. Once I had it all drilled, I flipped it back over so I could start wiring. I found a larger eye bolt on the farm that I wanted to use in the center of the top plate, which will connect the chandelier to the cable. I needed to cut a bigger hole for the new eye bolt, which I was having trouble figuring out how I was going to do and make sure it was still dead center without having to cut out a whole new bracket. Then I realized I could just make the origin of the cut be the center of the new circle, and I used the actual torch head to center the workpiece. It was really easy once I realized I could do that. I spent a lot of time drilling through heavy pieces of plate on the drill press before I had the CNC machine, which was not much fun. I threw it all back together and got it lifted up with the forklift to a position that would be the easiest to work on while I was wiring it. I found a fixture on Amazon that I thought would give me most of what I needed to wire the chandelier. It was essentially a ceiling mounted canopy with 13 strands and sockets coming off, which I think was meant to be sporadically mounted on the ceiling around the room. I just wanted the wire and sockets though, so I snipped off the rest of the parts. Kind of a waste, but it was surprisingly cheaper than if I bought a spool of wire and sockets and wired them all myself. I bought 2 of the light fixtures, giving the chandelier 26 bulbs. I also bought a big box of strain reliefs. I put one on the underside of the chandelier with the bulb set at the height I wanted, and then pulled upward on the wire, making sure it was snug, while I tightened down another strain relief on the top side. I varied the height of the sockets. To intentionally make something look random is harder than you think, but that's what I was going for. And then it was wire management time, which some weird part of me always enjoys. I was hoping to only use one electrical box, but I pretty quickly realized that there's no chance of all 26 wires and their connections fitting into one, so I stuck one on the opposite side as well. I picked up some heavy-duty rubber-coated black wire in town, which will be the main cord coming away from the chandelier that I'll plug into an outlet. It looked a little bit like a jumbled mess up top, but considering how many wires I had to work with, I was pretty happy with it. And now it's time to see if I got it wired right. Fingers crossed. Well, one works. That's a good sign. I bought Edison bulbs, which have the curly elements inside that you can see. I think they look really cool for something like this. It was now 2 days before the wedding, and I needed to figure out how the heck I was going to hang this thing. I was getting a little anxious about it, but that's when I work the best, when I have a hard deadline. I'm sure it's giving my sister and my family some anxiety as well. They were just anxious to start setting up the barn, but they couldn't really until I got the chandelier hung. I told them I just needed the better part of a day to focus on it, and I should be able to get it done. Should be able to. In the peak of my barn, there is a wooden beam that was used to lift bundles of hay up in the loft, back when it was being used as a dairy barn. My idea was to place a piece of heavy channel over the top of the beam to disperse the weight of the chandelier, and then a couple brackets welded to the channel will hold the pulley that the cable will wrap around. But I also wanted to attach this to the rafters as well, so I'm not just trusting the hayloft lift. I thought spreading the weight of the chandelier out over 3 rafters and tying it all together like this should make it really strong. I'm still thinking I'll make the bride and groom wear a hard hat for the first dance though. Gotta play it safe. This was my first time cutting 1/2-inch plate on the CNC table, and I thought I did a really good job. It's a slight bevel to the edges, but that's going to be pretty standard when using a plasma cutter on thicker material like this. I didn't have a piece of channel that was going to fit over the top beam, but I did have a tube that I thought I could use instead. I just had to cut the bottom side off of it. This was actually a piece of metal I had left over from my railing project. It's 1/4-inch thickness. Should be nice and strong. I cleaned up the cut edges with a grinding wheel and a flat disc on the angle grinder. I welded on a couple pieces of angle that I'll use to bolt the upper triangle pieces to. I decided I also wanted to bolt the brackets for the pulley through the wooden beam, so it's not just my untrained welds holding the whole chandelier. I welded one bracket to the side and then drilled through both the brackets and the square tubing at once, so I know the bolt holes would be aligned and level. I bolted through both brackets before welding the opposite side on. I also stuck the big bolt for the pulley in as well to make sure it was also aligned. The pulley I found on the farm that I wanted to use needed to be drilled out a little bit to go on the bolt. I really didn't know how I was going to drill, but drilled easy. After I cut a couple spacers to keep the pulley centered, I was ready to go back down to my barn and see if this whole mounting scheme was going to work. If it didn't work, and I had to come up with something else, I might have to tell my sister we're going to have to push the wedding back a couple hours. She probably wouldn't mind. I was really lucky to get to borrow a lift truck from a neighbor. I had no idea how I was going to do this without one. I promised him I'd wear the harness whenever I was in the lift, which I actually didn't mind because it makes my butt look nice. The peak of the barn is 32 feet high, which, even in the lift truck, is pushing my working height comfort limits. It surprised me how wobbly the bucket feels when it's extended out that far. It was easy to see why he told me to put the harness on. This is the old hay hoist I had mentioned earlier. I think it's a really cool antique. I might have to use it in some future project. Before I installed the square metal tubing, I had to plane the sides of the wood beam down just a little bit because it was a little bit too wide. And then I hoped like crazy the square tubing would fit as I carefully lifted it up into place.
Hey! I haven't been down there for a while, I'm not sure. She's either here or she...
It had to have been at least 110 degrees in the peak of the barn, and I was drenched in sweat and covered in dust and cobwebs by the time I finished installing this thing. I'm a farmer. I'm used to getting dirty, but I hadn't been this dirty in quite a while. After the metal trusses were all bolted and tightened down, the last thing to do was to install an outlet up top here that the chandelier will plug into. I also went ahead and wrapped the top side of the cable around the pulley and tightened it down with some cable clamps. And that was it. This thing was ready to have a chandelier hanging from it. I really like that it's a substantial amount of metal and nice and strong, but you really can't see it that much from down below. Especially when you're underneath it or kind of to the side, it just kind of disappears up in the rafters. Man, I was ready to get out of that bucket and come back down, that's for sure. Took me over an hour to get that thing wrapped up. My sister was nice enough to snap a picture right after. Thank you, Abby. I told her I hoped to take a shower before the wedding, but I wasn't sure if there was going to be enough time. A crowd magically gathered when it came time to hang the chandelier. I hope the peanut gallery was rooting for its success. Pretty sure they were. The groom was here to help too, which I think made the bride a little nervous.
That's future brother-in-law there.
I probably should have taken the time to remove the light bulbs before moving the chandelier around, but I was hoping to get away with it.
This light's hot. I got it.
It was a little harder than I thought it was going to be to get the cable through the eye bolt when the chandelier was already being hung on the chain. The groom had to come up and give me a hand, and we were finally able to get it. I was warning everyone beforehand that the chandelier was probably going to make the barn creak a little when it was first lowered onto the cable, just so they didn't get nervous about things. But it didn't make any noises and felt rock solid, which was really confidence inspiring. And I only had one broken bulb to swap out after all that. Not too bad. Alright, time for the moment of truth. Let's turn this thing on for the first time with it hanging in position.
Shield your eyes.
It's like the eclipse. You can't look at the lights.
Oh, nice!
That's so awesome.
That looks great. Oh, that's cool.
About a freaking million bulbs. God, that's really hard.
Yeah.
I was telling Justin and Chad that spend the night we'll start piling people on it. They can't even get on it.
That's why it's getting crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah, apologies to my sister and family for leaving this until the very end, making things a little more stressful than they needed to be. But, like I said in my speech I gave at the wedding a couple days later, it was just because I wanted everything to be perfect for my little sis and her new husband on their big night. I couldn't be happier for them, and it was such an honor for me that they wanted to have their wedding reception in my barn. I just kept thinking how amazing they were going to look during their first dance as husband and wife.
Yeah, that'll work.
This watches, ladies and gentlemen, their first dance. Very nicely done. Happy stay on the dance floor, time for a special dance. And Father